Welcome to our April Families webinar on supporting your student through crits and finals. We are excited to have you join this event, which is the third of a series of webinars we have organized for families to better support their student during the year. My name is Sana Nelson, and I work in the Alumni and Families Relations Department at RISD. I am joined here by Anu Mitchison, who is a Director of Operations and Student Affairs, as well as Mariam Han and Claire Robinson, both in the special events team. They are joining me in supporting our panelists, whom I will introduce in a moment. We are excited to have had 125 people register for this event. While many families come from the US, we also have a number of families from abroad. We have families joining us from China, from Canada, from India, Ecuador, Hungary, Japan, Jordan, Turkey, Thailand, Taiwan, Singapore, Nigeria, Poland, the UK, and Dubai, the UAE. I would like to share a couple of housekeeping rules. We are asking all members to be muted, and the session will be recorded, so it will be an option for you to listen to it as well. I know also many families are unable to make our calls at our webinars at the time they are organized, so this is always an additional resource. Once the speakers have completed their presentations, we will open the floor for Q&A, and we would like you to feel free to post anytime your questions through the Zoom Q&A function. I also want you to be aware of the content coming through the chat. Indeed, we will post links as a speaker talk about certain resources. We will post the bios of the speakers as well. So keep an eye there. And now let me introduce our speakers. We are really excited to have this team join us to, as I mentioned before, have you better understand what your student is going through during the period of crits and finals. We are joined by Professor Kai Franz, who is faculty in the Experimental and Foundation Studies Department. And he will be discussing what a crit is, as well as what faculty expects from a student. He will then be followed by Meredith Barrett, who's the Assistant Director at RISD's Center for Arts and Language, where she has been working for over 8 years. The center offers a lot of support to students, to all students throughout the year, but specifically a lot of students take advantage of those services in preparation for crits and finals. They can receive tutoring in writing, public speaking, visual communications. She will talk more about those resources in a moment. She has a background in literature, education, and writing center theory and practice. Then Julie Talbot, who is RISD's Assistant Dean of Student Support and Administration, will share. She has been working at RISD for 18 years, and she holds a BA in psychology and a master's in arts in teaching. She will be talking about the student's experience, but also how to support a student really grow during that period and be free to explore. Finally, we will have Bob Samuels talk to us from the perspective of the health and wellness. Since he joined in May 2021, health and wellness were put together under one umbrella. And he will be discussing the services available to students at that time, both in terms of counseling, psychological services, and health. Prior to joining RISD, Bob held positions at URI as well as Brown and Amherst College. He also worked for Community HMO. I want to thank everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. I know that a number of people did ask questions on vaccinations. Students have received an email about vaccinations today. We also are putting together the recording for the webinar that was open to students last night, and this will be available and has more information on vaccinations, what next year will look like, and those kinds of questions. This event is really focused on crits and finals and how your student is supported at that time. And now, with no further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Kai Franz to the floor.
Thank you very much, Sana. I hope you guys can hear me well. Thanks for the introduction. So I thought I would just show my face briefly before I share some slides. My name is Kai Franz. I'm originally from Germany. I studied architecture in Germany and in Switzerland. Worked for an architecture firm in the Netherlands and then in New York City, and received a fine arts education at RISD and also graduate education in Princeton, my master's in architecture. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm sharing this in part because I think it speaks to the fact that I have a foot in both the design world and the fine arts world, and hopefully you will see how that comes through in my reflections on what critique is, what critique offers, or can do, and how I think about it. So I've prepared a couple of slides for today. I will say that I've been at RISD for the last 6 years. I'm an associate professor here in the Division of Experimental and Foundation Studies, RISD's first year curriculum. Yeah, so with that, I would say I'm gonna go and share my slides right now. Okay. Sana, you will let me know if nobody can see those slides right now, but you should be seeing a green screen, sorry, a blue screen that says critique.
I can see it. It looks beautiful.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So critique or crit for short. What is critique? Critique is the most important form of assessment in art and design. It is a verbal form of assessment that happens live and in the moment. It is a space in which students and faculty come together to discuss the work produced in the studio. It is a space of contemplation on an individual and a communal level. Different disciplines tend to have different approaches, customs, and conventions. In other words, different critique practices. In architecture and other design disciplines, for example, it is a common model that students would present their project, explain their approach to the program, the brief, the site, via drawings, models, and visualizations to a group of jurors, followed by a debate between the students and the jury. Other students would listen to the conversation. In the fine arts, this format is very rare. A more common practice here is what is called a cold reading, an unmediated interpretation of the work by professors and students without any verbal presentation by the student who makes the work. And here I'm sharing a couple of images just from last semester critique work, a work that students of mine did in the first year program. I follow this approach in my first year spatial dynamics studio. Students do not get to present their work. We, the other students and I, react to it. The critique practice extracts meaning based on formal qualities, craft, art historical references, and materiality, the medium and materials that are being used. Everything that makes up the work is being evaluated. The previously mentioned attributes and qualities refer to the work itself. In a sculpture studio, the conversation would also include the work, how the work specifically relates to the space in which it is in and how it is installed. In an architectural design critique, this conversation will likely include the design of plans, drawings, and boards as works in their own right, as well as the presentation of its argument vis-a-vis the design of the building at a specific site. In other words, the conversation goes beyond the work. It extends into the space in which it is in. In that sense, there's also a social dimension. I personally start every final critique by thanking my students for their hard work and by stating that today is a celebration of their work and effort. Sometimes critiques are fun and joyful like this one, but sometimes they're not. My qualification as a celebration is a reminder that there is a social dimension to this ritual that we call critique. Simultaneously, it is intended to remind us that this is a safe space in which we need to be honest and ask hard questions out of respect for each other and our work. Critiques are formal, and while they are about the work doesn't always separate itself neatly from the author. Making art creates vulnerability. In our actions and gestures, we become legible. Making art is also an intuitive endeavor in which we often search for the unknown. In other words, its author might not always see their own actions with clarity. And while I don't think that there's right or wrong in art, I do believe that there's good and that there's bad. My ambition as a pedagogue in every studio that I teach is twofold. First of all, I want my students to become better artists and designers. For me, this means more knowledgeable, skillful, and to develop new sensibilities. Second, I strive for my students to become better critics. Here, I want them to become razor-sharp critics of potentially everything in the world, so that they are able to direct this critical gaze and apply methods and methodologies from the critique to simply everything around them, be that objects, including artworks or functional objects, but also social relationships and simply everyday life. This ambition is set out to penetrate the boundaries of art and life, to mobilize techniques and ways of thinking we practice in critique, which is so unique to artists and designers in an expanded way. In the studio, this means that the critique is actually less about the work in front of us and more about the active work of those who are critiquing. Thank you very much. And I think next is Meredith.
Yes, thank you, Kai. Hi, everybody. I am Meredith Barrett. I'm Assistant Director for the Center for Arts and Language. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about our center and specifically how students use our services to help prepare for their final critiques. If you're unfamiliar with our center, we offer peer tutoring, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. We also have multilingual learning support, advising for student publications, online resources, including handouts and video tutorials. We also offer workshops, both in-house and in classes with faculty. This photo is our usual center space. Obviously, we're not able to be there this year, but we've been working hard to recreate the interactions that happen there in our online setting this year. That's especially true for peer tutoring. Peer tutoring is one-on-one hour-long meetings via Zoom. It's free, included in students' tuition, and students bring in their written, visual, and spoken communication for feedback and support in their processes. Those kinds of projects might include essays for classes, cover letters for job applications. They might be designing the layout for their portfolio or their website. They might be making slides for an in-class presentation or just looking for strategies to feel less nervous engaging in classes and critiques. And students come to us at any stage in their process as well. These sessions are usually focused on a specific task or an assignment that's coming up. And students can be just starting on that, trying to come up with ideas. They might be somewhere in the draft stage, trying to organize their content or feeling stuck. They could be revising a full version, or if it's something oral, they might be practicing it to get used to the flow. And I think a lot of all of that is relevant for preparing for final critiques. I'll show you, this is our staff of lovely tutors. And I wish, they're about half grads and half undergrad students. They have a wide range of experiences with these different kinds of communication, and they have training and participate in ongoing professional development as tutors. So they're ready and willing and excited to work with students on whatever they're bringing in. And I would love to introduce you to all of them individually, but that's not quite possible. I do want to draw on their voices, though, to talk about their experiences of how students come into the center and use that peer tutoring opportunity to prepare for final critiques. I think that happens, I've noticed, on a couple of different levels. One is kind of the general manner of getting used to the critique setting and talking about your work. As a former tutor, Olive, put it, people are figuring out how they're going to talk about their work when they're showing their work, and how that can be kind of difficult. And just that idea of wanting to feel prepared is something that students come in and work on, and that building confidence really does happen through this conversation. I'd like to share a few specific examples of how that happens. These are reflections that our tutors write after every session, just to mark down what happened and what they learned from those experiences. I've removed all identifying information for both tutor and tutee, so they're completely anonymous. But I think that they really give us some insight into what students are thinking about and doing during this preparation time. So the first example reads, student wanted help formulating her thesis declaration in preparation for an upcoming oral crit. First, she showed me the department's suggested checklist of investigations to consider for her topic and research questions. We spent most of the session brainstorming these 10 or so what and how investigation questions, as well as adding several why questions. We also looked at her existing work and came up with terms that best worked for describing the form and concepts. This was a delightful session, and I urged student to make repeat appointments to continue developing these ideas and how to present them in the future. So this one is really about brainstorming content, trying to come up with the ideas and the vocabulary to bring into that critique setting. Another example says student brought in their studio crit for practice. Their crit is next week, so they wanted help rehearsing and refining the presentation. They ran through it a few times, during which I jotted notes of things to work on: pronunciation of key vocabulary, elaboration of key points, volume, and forming a beginning, middle, end. So this one is more about, okay, I already know I have to give a specific presentation. I want to practice. I want to revise it, maybe, if that's possible. And here are some specific examples of things that tutors and tutees work on together to improve those presentations. So that's one level, this idea of just getting used to it and practicing talking about your work and feeling prepared for the critique. I think there's another level I've noticed students utilizing this collaborative space of the tutoring session, and that's thinking about, how do I get the most out of these critiques? As Kai talked about, this critique community is about sort of developing a way of seeing and understanding and thinking about the world, which strengthens the students' work and also strengthens their practice. And I think that, working on your mode of critiquing is also really great preparation for engaging post-graduation, thinking about, how am I going to engage with the art criticism world? How will I engage with the art market, or even just with fellow artists and designers? And that's something that happens, bit by bit along their process. And I've noticed it in a few more example sessions I wanted to share with you. One reads, student played the recording of her Zoom crit for me. Afterwards, we discussed the salient points brought up by the critics, looked up some of their references, and student asked clarification questions. She did a professional job with her presentation and justifiably earned kudos from the critics. This session made me appreciate Zoom's recording capabilities and made me want to voice record in-person critiques in the future myself. So this one's really about unpacking the feedback that you get in critiques. It can be kind of overwhelming in the moment to take in everything that everyone's saying, understand really what it means, think about what you want to do with it, and know how to move forward from that moment. So it's really helpful if you can take notes or have a friend take notes, or if it's possible to in some way record what people are saying and then have time to revisit and really digest those comments later. And that's something that can happen in conversation with others. Another great example reads, student told me she's been having trouble communicating her ideas in crit, especially people asking her conceptual questions she's unprepared for or that seem off topic to her. She practiced presenting to me and didn't provide much background info on her work. I told her how I might read some of her pieces as a viewer coming into critique cold, which prompted her to provide more background info. Then we had a much more productive discussion about her work. I suggested that she prepare some bullet points to speak about at the start of her crit, or an artist statement to circulate so that people can direct their questions more appropriately. So this one's really nice because it's thinking about how do I get feedback that's more relevant and useful for me? How do I shape the conversation so that it's productive and I can move my work forward in a way that's meaningful to me? And I threw in just one last example on this end. This student came in for his first of our weekly sessions. He was incredibly excited to meet me and discuss his first week here at RISD. Student is very inquisitive and excited to learn. He is clearly still adjusting to life at RISD and asked me for skills that he can use to critique, expressing that he has never had to critique until now. We talked through a few examples of different types of art and how different critiques might look. The session was really great. So I love this example because it's thinking about the other side of that, again, critique community, that you're not just receiving feedback, you're also expected to participate, to share your thoughts on other people's work. And so having some conversations about how that might work and how do I provide some meaningful insights for others. I hope that this has been helpful for, again, understanding what students are going through as they're preparing for critiques, and also how our center can be useful. These are modes of contacting. Feel free to share them with your students or reach out. And I will look forward to your questions. And now I'll hand things over to Julie. Julie, take it away.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm Julie Talbot. I'm the Assistant Dean for Student Support and Administration, as Sana said, and I'd like to talk to you today about ways that you as families can support your students. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, bear with me one moment. I've had nothing but technical difficulties all day today. Okay. So as you've heard so far from both Kai and Meredith, your young artists are not on their own as they prepare for their final reviews. They're developing their work and they have trusted faculty and academic resources to help them develop their voice as artists. My colleague, Dr. Bob Samuels, who will speak after me, will talk a little bit more about the specific services that are available for students to support them in other ways. So please encourage your student to know what their resources are and to make good use of them. So as families and parents of RISD students, you're probably wondering about the ways that you can support your artist as they embark on the last weeks of the academic year. There are specific avenues that you can use to help your students thrive as they round out their year of study. As Kai mentioned earlier in the presentation, critique is the live and communal cornerstone of art and design education. It's also a practice, and in that sense, students develop new skills through critique. And like any emergent practice, some work presented will feel more successful than others. Kai mentioned sometimes critiques feel joyful and fun, and other times they don't. And because work can be very personal, there is that sense of vulnerability when a critique doesn't go as hoped for. Just know that that's normal and healthy. Making mistakes and taking intellectual risks and not knowing the answer, these are part of the artistic process itself. Risk-taking and willingness to confront failure are particular and unique parts of arts education, unique as compared to other forms of education. There'll be times when your student feels that they've stumbled. In that case, it's an opportunity for you to center the growth that they're fostering. Remind them that exploration and iteration lead to innovation. Mistakes themselves are not something to fear, but fear of making mistakes can inhibit growth. Creating, analyzing feedback, and revising is part of what helps build thoughtful artists. Encourage your artists to work in scales and ways that stretch their comfort zone, to try new ways of doing things. Trust your student to find their voice and know that space is being created to help them as they learn. Lastly, encourage your student to connect to the activities that help them grow in all directions. They will likely not need encouragement to work hard. RISD students work extremely hard, but they may benefit from reminders to take breaks. Seemingly simple activities like taking a walk or sharing a laugh with peers can be marvelously grounding. Your young artists will weigh every potential activity against the time they could be spending on work in studio. Give your student permission to seek balance via social connections and fun activities. So thank you. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Bob Samuels.
Well, hello again, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm the Executive Director of the Integrated Health and Wellness Center. This is a combination of health services, health education, and counseling and psychological services. And I'm going to talk to you as well about supporting your student through the CRIT process. Okay, we're back. Just wanting to put a reminder out there in terms of stress and anxiety. These are both things that all of us have experienced in one form or another. You know, the tension resulting from demanding circumstances, and then the uneasiness when we're talking about an uncertain outcome. And this is what the CRITs represent, particularly students who are less familiar with it. And so if you just reflect on your own experiences of both of these, that'll give you some insight into what they're going through, but also lacking the experience of having successfully gone through that process. When we look at critiques versus finals, the process of finals, more familiar, it's usually connected to a specific course or piece of knowledge, whereas CRIT is a less familiar process, and it's connected to a piece of work, but from department to department, from faculty member to faculty member. As Kai mentioned, there are various CRIT cultures, and they can be very different indeed. The student's experience, the finals may look at a reflection of what they know, but the CRITs themselves, students may experience as a reflection of who they are as artists, and sometimes they may feel that it's an indication of who they can become in terms of how they experience the critique itself. Specifically in supporting a student, understanding core fears. Have I prepared enough? Did I have a plan? Is my presentation ready? Meredith talked about rehearsing and refining, and the more you do each of those, it increases confidence and reduces anxiety. And then the critique itself, have I accepted that it's a part of the process of becoming a creator? Have I accepted this as part of the learning process in terms of not only how to see the world, but as an artist, developing a way of how to receive the world, and just, how do you take and how do you incorporate, decide what to keep, what to discard in terms of what you're taking in at those moments. As a parent or family member, your role has changed. You've been supportive up to this time. I mean, your presence here is indicative of your support. But when your student was younger, you were maybe, the coach. You were right there every step of the way with encouragement and direction and guidance. Then as they became, got older, more independent, you were a little bit more of a cheerleader, standing on the side and, sort of watching, but, cheering them on every step of the way. And now it may feel like you're a spectator and really, seeing things from afar or hearing about things much later. And it feels very different, and you as a parent might not be clear on your role. It is okay to ask them what kind of support they need and what would be most helpful. Here are some ideas that might be helpful. Julie, talked about some of these. Reminding your student of the resources on campus. Excuse me. When you're talking about, the Meredith, the Art and Language Center, and using faculty members. These scary faculty actually are there to help you become better, and just reminding them of that, even though sometimes it may be uncomfortable, they have a lot of information and a lot of guidance. Communicate that you care. Positive messages, good luck, I believe in you, by text, by phone call. I don't know if anybody uses snail mail anymore, a care package. Just showing them some things that let you know that they're going through a very challenging time. But don't overdo it. Give them some space. Know that they're busy. They may not respond as quickly as they have the rest of the year. You don't want to add additional stress. You don't want them to have to take care of your anxiety about their anxiety going through critiques and finals. Remind them of the stress release strategies that have worked in the past, exercise, walking, intentional breathing, taking a break. Highlighting the basics of staying healthy. Sleeping can increase productivity and creativity. James Mass, who's author of Sleep for Success, says even 1 more hour of sleep can make a huge difference in achievement. Eating, it seems obvious, but you have to feed the body and the brain. And then paying attention to your students' mental health. Some changes can be attributed to the pressure they're experiencing. But if you know your student better than anyone else, if something seems more extreme or out of character, start by simply asking, hey, what's going on? And then listen. You might not be able to fix everything at that moment, but listening is a place to start. Many students feel embarrassed about admitting they need help. Try to provide ideas and support without shaming them. Academic resources, as we've already mentioned. And then there's counseling and psychological services. During the finals period, we have same-day appointments available. Students can call up and speak with a clinician the exact same day. We've partnered with an after-hours support team called Protocol. And when the clinic isn't open, students can speak with clinicians through the night, and they can help facilitate follow-up appointments with CAPS clinicians. And in the rare event, if there's an emergency, they can also notify appropriate personnel. Listen, remind them of the ideas, give them some time, and then check back and see, how they're doing and how they're managing. This is going to be a challenging time, but it's a time of growth, which is the exciting part. And part of what you need to convey to them is your confidence in their ability to get through this time period successfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. This was great. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your presentations. I hope families have found them useful. I think it gives a very good sense of what crits are like, especially for new families who have not had their student live through that much yet. And there are so many resources available to students to help them prepare. I know a parent had asked whether students were aware of this and whether this should be a presentation for students. Students are told about all these resources, but part of the reasons why we organize those family webinars are so that parents can also be fully aware of the resources and reach out to their student and say, did you know about this? I just learned about it, and it seems like you would really benefit from it. So we're hoping to have you get your student to take advantage of all those. And now let me open the floor for some of the questions. What we will do is that I will read out loud some of the questions that were posted in the Q&A. Some of the questions are being answered individually, and some, because we have a number of people who are asking similar questions, we are bringing up live. So we have a question from Kim Cummins. Are there any social activities planned, not run by students, in the next couple of weeks to encourage students to take breaks? Julie, would you like to take that one on?
Sure, I can speak to that. So there are social activities run by students and also run by professional staff. It's worth mentioning that in the instances where student-run clubs and organizations sponsor activities, all of those do have the support and the scaffolding from professional staff. So I wouldn't make a huge distinction between student activities and purely staff-run activities. You as parents can log on to involve.risd.edu, which is our one-stop shop for campus events, clubs and organizations, and other news. There are over 50 clubs and organizations that students can be part of, and students are eligible to start a new club and organization if they have an interest. So that being said, between club activities run through our Center for Student Involvement, who also does special programming specifically for stress relief during the week of final reviews. There are activities in the coming weeks and really building up in the last week of the semester.
Thank you, Julie. We have a question as well from a parent about, still Kim Cummings, actually, about mental health. My child is under the impression that mental health services are only available for one-off sessions in extreme circumstances, not for weekly support. Is that the case? This is a question for Bob. And Bob, we have received a number of questions about accessing mental health psychological support.
So the CAPS, or Counseling and Psychological Services, is designed for brief treatment. So there may be weekly sessions set up, but it's not designed to go weekly for the entire year. And if it feels like it's something that requires that, they will make connections for the student in the community. When I was referring to crits and finals, those are same-day appointments, and they can be one-off, but they can be still, 2 to 3 times, just depending upon the nature of the difficulty and the time in the semester that they contact the center. All of the appointments are through telehealth. The students have made that transition probably more easily than the staff, but they've been engaged. We've seen an increase in the utilization of the appointments, so students are aware that we exist and have been making use of it. Were there other questions about CAPS that I can answer? Okay. Well, you can
Thank you,
send
Bob.
it.
We do have a question from Brian Byrne about how and when students can become tutors. Meredith, I think that would be a great question for you.
Absolutely, thank you. We usually start the hiring process right about now. I'm about to open up the call for applications, and tutors begin working in fall semester and work throughout the given academic year. I can usually make accommodations if someone's, it needs to be away or is traveling for winter session. That's a common thing, but usually they stick around for the whole year. And usually if they're not graduating, they stick around after that too. So students can keep an eye on our website. We'll post the job posting there. Undergrads can also find it on the student employment website with all the listing of all the available jobs. And grad students can find it also via the Grad Commons website. It should be posted up there. Students can also always reach out if they're curious or just have questions about becoming a tutor. I'm always happy to field those, and I always follow up when I am ready to take applications.
Thank you, Meredith. I think there is also a question that's a bit similar though different about how to support a student and how crits are. But first, before I ask her, I just want to make sure that you all saw that in your chat box, link to the academic calendar was posted. We did receive a question from a parent asking when crits were happening. I know that they're starting next week, but for the complete listing of when each department is holding them, please feel free to click on that link. And now I did want to ask a question. Thank you for all the useful information. Kai Frantz's explanation of the theory around the crit process is very insightful. Understanding that there would be privacy issues for actual sessions but is there a sample or training critique session recording available somewhere, where RISD or elsewhere? Even a fictional representation in a film or show could be insightful for parents interested in understanding the crit process. Maybe Meredith, you can share a little bit based on your experience supporting students. I don't know, Kai, if you have also some insight to share, or Julie?
Sure, I can hop on that one at least to start. I would definitely defer to Kai a little bit more on this, but the website Art Prof came to mind. They're not RISD specific, but they do have recorded critiques. I think they might be one-on-one as well, rather than group critiques. So it's definitely different. But if students are ever looking for, just language around how are people talking about each other's work, that's maybe a resource. So that's something to maybe start with. But I know also, I'm not quite sure how it's working this year with most things being on Zoom, but students, I believe, can sit in on other departments and other classes critiques. So those aren't necessarily recorded, but if the students themselves are looking again for exposure to different modes of critiquing, that is sometimes an option. But yeah, I don't know if Kai or Julie want to add anything more to that idea.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of words. I don't have a specific reference of like a video or something that I can point to on the internet, but I will say a few things. So one that comes to mind is in the first year experience, most of the students don't have a critique experience and have that kind of to draw from. And so it's new to everyone. With the design of the first year curriculum, the students are assigned 3 studio professors, one in drawing, one in spatial dynamics, and one in design. And then in the following semesters, in the spring semester, they have 3 new professors, again, spatial dynamics, design, and drawing. And so the idea in this curriculum is that it produces synergies, but also contradictions, And so I'm mentioning this because in a way, I'm well aware that my students don't have the critique experience, or that they may have like 1 or 2 other professors that may have run critiques entirely differently. I spoke a little bit about the difference in disciplines, but I think there's also like a personal take to it, how a professor approaches this from what time they are, from what generation they are, what kind of training they are. In a way, like, you know, who you are as a person also determines all of those things, and they come to play. And so, you know, I will say that I think like all students do have this introduction to critique space, to the critique in the studio spaces. And then I will also say that the critiques are oftentimes public. I mean, it depends a little bit on the classroom, but like every semester I receive an email that's asked whether or not my critique is public or if allow other people. And so there is a master spreadsheet somewhere that says which critiques are open where people can visit. And then I will also say, oftentimes the critiques do take place actually in public spaces. So for example, in the architecture building, the BEB building, the critiques are being held always on the ground floor in the gallery space. And it is a very much kind of like shared public event where people can come from within the department, see other people, see their kind of like peers, studio work, but also, you know, I always tell my first year students, go and see the critique, see what that space is like, see what the culture and community is like in any department. So take advantage of that and experience that. So yeah, that's maybe what I would have to say.
Thank you, Kai. Julie, did you want to add something or?
Just to reinforce some of the points that Meredith and Kai made, and perhaps I'm maybe getting ahead of myself a little bit because I see that there's been a question about the difference between the crits upcoming and those conducted throughout the year. And I'd like to say it depends a lot of times on what the goals of the course are or the goals of the crit are. So for instance, a crit throughout the year might be about a particular iteration of a particular assignment. And so it's much more localized. Whereas at the end of the year, there are reviews that are, as Kai said, reviewing anything from a retrospective of a student's entire year of work with an eye toward what the recommendations and some areas of study for the coming year might be, to a deep dive with external critics on a degree project or a thesis, the culminating work of a student's entire period of study at RISD.
Thank you, Julie. That's really helpful. I know earlier on we shared the academic calendar for you to be able to get a sense of when crits and finals were taking place exactly in different departments. But Jeff Pearson asked a very good question in terms of what's the difference between the crits that are coming up and those that were conducted throughout the year. And I do want, before one of you jumps into to explain the difference, to mention that originally we had planned to have a similar webinar take place in the fall, but we focused instead of preparing the students, preparing you for the fall instead. But some of the crits are similar from the fall, but who would like to share a bit more from our panelists? Kai, I see you approaching the.
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, so it depends a little bit on the studio in a way, how the studio is set up. You know, so in my case, for example, we have critiques next week. It's specific in EFS this semester. We have our studios condensed so that these 3 studios I mentioned before are not running in parallel, but are running really condensed within 4 weeks. So I have critique coming up next week. And that's going to be my final critique. And essentially, we're going to critique all of the work that was done in the studio until then. So this week and last week, for example, I did desk critiques with the students, where essentially me and the TAs would sit down with every student individually, or in the case of a group, with the group of those students, and in a way discuss the project. This is a much less formal event. It takes place kind of at the desk. We're looking at in progress work. It's clear that the work isn't, you know, completed. And then next week again, you know, I do this like cold reading where that's when everything has to be done, and we're going to look at that final work. And then the following day, I have my other critique for another project. Now, this is very specific a little bit to this kind of condensed studio experience that we have right now. That's more like a marathon style, really immersive, focused on one studio. In an architecture studio, you know, you oftentimes have a midterm critique. That's might still be formal. There might not be as many guest jurors. You know, for a final critique, oftentimes in architecture and design, you have people come from a different institution. Maybe somebody from Harvard, maybe somebody from Brown comes to join the panelists, and you might have 4 professors who are there. For a pin-up or midterm, you maybe have 1 guest visitor from within the school here. And then there's things like pin-ups. Let's say a kind of practice of presentation where the student gets to present their project. Maybe it's just their research on the side, or the program, for example, in the case of architecture, like how they approach the design of the program. You know, other formats could also be a science fair is sometimes also applied, where, you know, I might ask students to pin up work, and then we go around in groups, and the students give feedback to each other. So those are all, I guess, like, you know, to some extent tests. They are more there to help us in the process. And then the final critiques, you know, it's the last time that we can come together and look at the work, I guess, more holistically, and also reflect on the semester. You know, I will also say that, I guess, at the end of a critique, I oftentimes take some time, maybe half an hour, maybe 20 minutes, to reflect with the students, also kind of like on the larger themes of the studio, and maybe the kind of like work as a whole, as how it relates, like, you know, observations from thoughts that come up when we're thinking about the work as a collection, or the works next to each other, what they spark, right? So there's a bit of a kind of like removed stepping back and like reviewing the semester together with the students that's taken place, that during the semester I maybe wouldn't do in the same way. Yeah.
Thank you, Kai. I have a question that came in for Bob. What provision is there for actually checking up on students who are isolating or not allowed to gather and may not be forthcoming with news of their mental state?
Well, it's always very tricky in terms of connecting with students who are isolating, because there is a, you know, hope and expectation that they will be engaged at least at some level with people within their living area, and the residential life staff are the primary first point of contact, and they've been working very hard, even through this Zoom world, to have different, you know, Zoom events, and really trying to have a regular sort of interactions with the students, even virtually. And they're usually our first line, and they will notify their supervisors and make connections and referrals to, you know, to the care team, which Julie can speak to. And they work with a counseling center too. And so when it becomes a level of concern, we will engage. But the first line of approach, I think it's a better way of saying it, is our residential staff. And they've been trained, and they've been reaching out and working to make connections since the beginning of the year. I think Julie can fill in and flow to the next question too.
You were on mute.
Unmute myself. Yes. So Bob is absolutely right. And I would elaborate that he mentioned the CARE network, which is a multidisciplinary team on campus that's responsible for early intervention for students who are having any kind of challenges. And the team works very closely with our faculty partners to let us know if there's a student who seems like they're having a difficult time, and it's showing up within the class or the studio space, or student discloses that they're feeling isolated, or if they miss some classes, that can be a red flag as well. And so the goal really is to not allow a student to slip through the cracks. And so the safety net that we've woven in connection with faculty is actually pretty tightly strung.
I mean, I will also say just maybe a few words on that from a faculty perspective. You know, as I said, I was trying to stress this idea that, you know, making art is a kind of like act of vulnerability. It's highly personal, right? Like, and I mean, any creative output is that. because it is so meaningful to one's own kind of like the act of creation in a way, you know. I will say that as a faculty member, I think we get to know the students really well, and we're spending a lot of time with them, and you know, we see them, and I notice if a student is not doing well, if something is up, you know. I might say something early on, and it might be that everything is okay, but if I notice that something kind of continues, that there's a pattern or anything like that, then I will certainly also, you know, share this with my dean and also the administration, so that we also reach out to students, because it's just, I guess, like important to do that. You know, sometimes the hurdle of like going through that, I guess, threshold of like finding help, seeking help, or not even knowing that there is help, just needs to be broken. And so, yeah, I just want to also kind of like say that.
Thank you, Kai. I do want to mention that it is 1:01 Eastern time, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We usually put a hard stop at 1:15. So, and we do have a few questions still in the Q&A for those who are able to stay on. I know, Kai, you have a lecture coming up, so you might not be able to. I really appreciate you making time to join us and answer all those questions that parents had. It was very insightful, I believe, for everyone. But for those who are able to stay, please join us for a few more questions. We will also be posting a survey on the chat, and we are always waiting for feedback from families, as it helps us decide on content for other family webinars. So take a look there as well. Otherwise, I will move on to the next question. It is a question for Julie. What support and resources are there for students returning to campus after taking a gap year?
Sure. So in this particular moment, RISD is looking forward to welcoming back a larger than usual number of students who are returning after leaves of absence and gap year. And so we have a number of supports that are baked into the process. We do have staff individually reading every single application reinstatement and flagging for resources that students are asking about or needs that they're identifying in their form itself, because there is a place for students to self-identify in that place. And so we are planning outreach for each of those students. There's also an acknowledgement that there will be special orientation and reorientation needs for students who are returning after a gap year. That also goes for students that we're expecting who will be coming for their sophomore year after a year of remote study. We do have students who will be arriving on campus for the first time, living in the residence halls for the first time after never actually being on campus. And so we plan to orient and reorient those special students who have special needs. The last thing I would say is we are partnering with every academic department in order to have a team to rework any degree path plans that students have, transfer in courses that students may have taken in other places, making sure that students' academic advising needs are met before they actually arrive at RISD. So there's both the psychosocial, the academic, and the degree path plans that are all going to be managed before students even set foot on campus leading up to their arrival in September.
Thank you, Julie. And now I have a question for you, Meredith. It is to get to know a little bit more about the Center for Arts and Languages. It is from Victoria McCready, who, well, the question disappeared, but just getting to know a little bit more about what the process is for a student to receive those services.
Of course, yeah, thanks. If it's okay, I'm actually going to share my screen for one extra moment here. Just it's helpful to see. This is our homepage, our website, artsandlanguage.risd.edu. And we've tried to make it as easy as possible to find what you need. So this right here is instructions for how to make an appointment to work with a tutor, to do that practicing or brainstorming together. This is the link for actually joining our virtual office, our Zoom online presence. And I'm actually there Monday through Friday, usually 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'm there. So, even if someone just needs to pop in for clarification on how to make an appointment or something, I'm happy to help with that while I'm there during normal hours. But there are also later appointments that are just one-on-one with the tutor. And we also have a page of resource guides that are great for in between appointments, or if you want to get started before you have an appointment, you can look at these guides based on what it is you're working on. So you might want to look at speaking about your work or writing about your work, or if it's a more prepared presentation, preparing a talk or presentation, there's handouts, links, videos, all kinds of things there. So I hope that's helpful in clarifying, they can work on their own with our resources, they can make an appointment to talk about those resources, or to just start from scratch, just, hey, this is what I'm thinking about, and we can figure it out from there. And they're welcome to pop in if possible.
Thank you, Meredith. And now I think we'll ask the last question that I can see, which would be for both Bob and Julie, if you can tag team. How can I best support my child? She is remote now and seems to have tons of work and stress.
I unmuted first, so I guess I'm going first. I think that the first thing is for you as a parent to take a deep breath and realize that you're not going to be able to support your student in the way that you may have supported them in the past. And it just feels different as a parent to see your student struggle and see them just really not feel like they're at their best. And then really following some of the suggestions that I've put forth in terms of, talking to them, about the resources on campus that you've heard about today, and reminding them, okay, these people literally are paid to help you, to help you get through this process. And really remind them of things that have worked in the past in terms of managing stress, and taking a break and sleeping. And also fundamentally your belief in their ability to get through this and to take it as part of the growing process, but that they can be successful. And that's the confidence that you can sort of share with them that you have. Julie.
I agree with everything that you said. I would also add that all students are eligible for time management workshops that are offered to all students through the Office of Disability Support Services. It's open to students regardless of disability status. And I don't know if I have the capability to share the flyer through here, but if not, maybe I can follow up with you about sharing with registered parents. This is not just a great opportunity to help students manage their time so that there isn't that overload, but there's one-on-one negotiation of understanding what an assignment is asking for. So a lot of our students have perfectionistic tendencies. There's a desire to create something that is that is a perfect product, when the assignment may be really asking for more of a draft approach. And so it's a way to mediate, what are the expectations? How can you use time? How can you make time for other things that are important, like sleeping, resting, socializing? If the times of these workshops are not workable for any students can reach out to Disability Support Services for some one-on-one time management at a different time. So I highly, highly recommend these workshops that are available at no cost.
Thank you, Julie. I do want to mention as well that we posted on the chat the family's website, and I recommend that everyone click on that link and goes there, because we have listed a number of resources available for students there as well, so that it has information Julie shared. It has a link to the Meredith Center as well. So there's a lot of useful information. And we're always looking forward to hearing about more information that would be helpful for parents that we could post there as well. And now it is about 1:10. So I did want to close the event. Thank everyone who has joined us as panelists and as speakers for making time to attend this session. As I mentioned earlier on, this is being recorded. So if you had to jump off the webinar to do something else and came back, well, you're still able to listen in to the recording. You haven't missed anything. It's there. And we will be sending that to you shortly and it will also be posted on the family's website. So one more opportunity to get to that website. You might have also noticed in the chat that there is a link to a survey, and we really appreciate the feedback we can get about the programming we can provide, how helpful this webinar was, how helpful other webinar topics might be. So thank you very, very much, everyone, for presenting, for joining, for supporting your student, getting to know more about what the RISD environment is like. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday and weekend. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.